Okay, we'll get started. So hello to everyone around the world and welcome to our webinar today on Urban Wash, Viable Options to Minimize Corruption. My name is Marika Poole and I'm proud to be part of RockBlue, an international NGO on empowering water and sanitation utilities to create healthy cities and improve lives. For more information, you can check out our website at rockblue.org. So today's topic is an important, however challenging one. While many work for the common good in implementing effective and sustainable wash projects, many times we encounter individuals, organizations, or practices that take away from the mission and are focused on siphoning funds or goods for personal benefit. We have assembled a panel of experts with experience in many projects to provide their knowledge and advice to minimize corruption practices in urban wash delivery. We're going to start with a few discussion topics for the panelists, and then we have a Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A bottom at the bottom right of your screen. So with me today, we have Robert Gakubia. Robert is an independent water and sanitation professional and has been a director of Blackburn Associates Ltd, a water development and management consultancy based in Nairobi, Kenya since July of 2021. Prior to his present vocation, he was the CEO of the Kenya Water Services Regulatory Board from 2008 to 2021. Robert also worked as the Chief Engineer Director of Water Services at the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation, a position he rose to after having held other senior positions in the ministry. Next, we have Daniela Pineros with the Water Integrity Network. Daniela manages advocacy and integrity management projects in Latin America. She has a background in public policy and several years of professional experience leading multi-stakeholder initiatives in the fight against corruption and in relation to sustainable development goals in Colombia and Latin America. She has worked with diverse actors, raising awareness and creating momentum in the private sector and civil society to promote local initiatives and mobilize new sources of finance. And last but not least, we have Otto Brown. Otto Brown is a retired development specialist with over 30 years of global experience. He's retired from the World Bank after over 25 years of service. His last position was country manager of the World Bank for Kazakhstan in the Europe and Central Asia region. And before this assignment, he was the country manager for Sierra Leone in the Africa region, where he successfully led the World Bank Group's response to the Ebola pandemic in the country. Thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you. Okay, great.
Sure.
Great to have you here. So, this is definitely an important conversation to have, and one that's a little, risque perhaps, but we're gonna have it. So, we're talking about corruption, which can also be channelized as or referred to as bad governance or lack of integrity in the sector. So I want to start with a few questions initially. So, from your experience, what has been a major or sorry, hold on, let me just get my questions. Let me just pull the questions up right now. Okay, so in your experience, so what are some of the clear signs that corruption or bad governance is occurring or may occur at the donor funding level, the contractor level, the local partner management level, or the supplier delivery level and the beneficiary level? So there's very many different levels where corruption or bad governance can come into play. And, we talked about this is a very broad topic and can be country specific and even, utility specific, right? And so what are some of the key indicators that this might happen in any of those sectors, any of those levels along the supply chain? And any of you can answer.
Maybe.
Go ahead, Daniela. Sorry, go ahead.
Or Ato, if you want to start.
No, Daniela, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, maybe I can start giving some ideas, but I'll be very happy to hear also Atos and Robert's perception. Well, first of all, thank you, Barika, and thank you, Rockflow in general, to your team for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to share this panel with Engineer Gakubi and of course with Ato. To start and specifically to answer your question, Barika, I think that, and you said it in the introduction, I think the problem with this, with corruption, with this integrity failures, is that generally it happens in the shadow, or it happens in the shadows. And corruption can take many faces. And I think that's one of the challenges we have as organizations that are actively working towards trying to prevent these corruption practices from happening or mitigating it, is that it's constantly changing and it materializes in different ways in different settings. So before answering your question, I think I would take a step back and start understanding what's the definition of corruption. According to the AI, corruption, it's basically defined as the abuse of power for private gain. And it can take several phases. It can take from direct payments, for example, to access to a service of water, to a service of sanitation. It can take the phase of certain favors, for example, to favorize or to give funds primarily to a village that is, it's a friends or it's a family of the people that is taking the decision. It can take the phase of using substandard, cheaper materials in the construction of a specific project. So it can take many phases. And in general, I think from the work that we have been doing at WIN, we could categorize this integrity failures or these corruption practices in the provision of water and sanitation in urban scenarios in three main categories. So the first one is corruption that can happen in the management of public resources. So basically, this is known as grant corruption. It involves lots of or big amount of money. And I think this is what we see in the news where there's a new scandal of corruption that you see these big amounts of money that are being lost. And this can include from funds being diversed in certain construction projects. It can be derived from not prioritizing the maintenance or certain projects by prioritizing other projects where resources are easily captured. It can go to officials asking for abusive per diem claims. So I think these are very specific examples or indicators in this first category of corruption in the management of public resources. On the other hand, we have seen corruption in the interface between the institutions and the individuals. And this is known as petty corruption. And basically is what happens, for example, when there's a bribery of an official to access a service, when there's a bribery, for example, to get a speedier connection to services of water and sanitation, or even to look somewhere else where there are illegal connections. So I think these are specific other kinds of practices of corruption that happen in a smaller level, but are equally important also because of the amount that they have and the failures they bring in the system. And on the third hand, I think this is one of the key categories, is also issues or failures of integrity and the impact they have overall equity and development. So I think here we have to put a very big focus in terms of corruption and bad governance and integrity failures generally have an impact over the most vulnerable and the most marginalized in terms of access to water and sanitation and in terms of the fulfillment of their rights. So in here, when we talk about issues of equity and development, we're looking at lack of financial provision, for example, in informal settlements. We're looking at lack of inclusion mechanisms to hear users in peripheral urban scenarios. We're talking about lack of mechanisms, for example, with people with different socio-democratic backgrounds. So I think these topics are key. And I would leave it here for now. I'm sorry if it was a little bit long, but just wanted to give this general context to start the conversation going. Thank you.
No, that's fine.
Maybe I can take it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here. You know, your question is very context specific when you look at our experiences in the water sector. in my view, and it has generally been said this, that the water crisis is a crisis of governance. But generally, it is not easy to define good governance, but it is so easy to see bad governance. The fact that we do not have water and sanitation services for everyone in this 21st century means that we have challenges at all levels, whether it is at the development funding level, whether it is at the contractor level, at the local management level, even the whole supply chain for water sector infrastructure delivery. So in our case, I think most of what I've encountered is systemic corruption. And systemic corruption is essentially systematic and to a large extent institutionalized, and one of the biggest political economy issues, at least in my country. So all these levels which you have mentioned have challenges in the framework which we generally use to do some analysis on corruption and how we need to respond to it. There are challenges within in terms of transparency of what they are doing. There are challenges in terms of accountability to the users, and even when it comes to funding agencies, in terms of accountability to even the partner countries, because a lot of times they are under pressure to spend money. They do not want even to investigate issues of integrity failure because, of course, there is a reputation problem. Mm-hmm. So because of this institutionalization of bad governance, the so-called corruption fighters may as well be corrupt and can sometimes create smoke screens even to hide their own corrupt practices. From our political economy perspective, I think struggles are about control of resources and institutions, and the complexity of the water and sanitation sector, in my view, and its capital intensity makes it a natural playground for patronage politics, and this exacerbates the bad governance. Political capture of the water policies and programs, which I think is made worse also by the weak technical and management capacity at various levels, and especially the top levels, have been very big signs and causes of the presence of corruption in the sector. So at all levels, when you look at it, there are signs. When there is no monitoring, for example, but from a funding agency level, and there is fear of scandal, for example, that in itself complicates the work and is a sign of corruption even. When there are kickbacks even for professionals and they are not able, then they are even colluding in the tethering and concealing of substandard work, because sometimes we deliver the outputs, yes, but the outputs do not deliver any outcomes for many reasons. Either they were not fit for purpose or they were basically just substandard. So there are many signs, especially when there is that institutionalization of corruption, as I said before. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Otto, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to, the three levels in kind of clear signs. One is poor services. I mean, when you have poor services, especially in spite of investment, then you know there's something wrong. You know, I mean, that's basic for me. That's the first test where you just walk in the service area and you see people are not getting water. People are not getting sanitation services. People are not getting, frequency of cuts, or consumer relations are very bad. People report they don't get service. People don't respond to services. You know there's something wrong. But especially when there's investment going on and the services are not maintained or available, you know there's something going on. And it could be attributed to corruption. There's also, you do a quick diagnostics of an investment, and you realize maybe general collusion among bidders or collusion among contractors, bad supervision, bad management in the utility level, and so on. Then you know there's also something going on. But I think there's also a third level that before you get into any country or go to invest, you have a sense of, right when you arrive at the airport, you know there's something wrong in this country, and you see that in a very, you don't have to do a very detailed level of diagnosis to know that there's corruption is rife in this environment, and it translates to services, whether it's water, electricity, or roads, and so on. You can, the potholes from the airport will tell you there's something wrong in this town, especially when there's consistent investment. You know, when there's no investment, the country is broken, nothing, then you can forgive the system a bit. But in some cases, there's consistent investment by donors. A lot of donors are flocking into the country because the country is poor. And then the services are not being delivered. Then you have to go to another detailed level to see what's going on and how bad the corruption is. So you can start beginning to fix things. But consumer experience for me is always the first line of sign that, you know, something is going wrong in this town.
Excellent. Those are, you know, because we really want to be able to give people, you know, if there's kind of, and just like you said, when you arrive in the country at the airport, you know, if somebody's trying to, you know, hassle you to get out of the airport, you know, you would say, okay, this place, you know, maybe a sign, that might be a sign. But it, you know, kind of in to like spot it at the beginning, maybe, you know, of an investment or a project, or maybe in the background research that you're doing in country, is very important, so that you're not already making the investment and then funds go awry. Okay, great. So, you know, we really want to give people some, you know, concrete actions to be able to spot. So the next question is, what is the one action that done at the local level will be the most effective at curbing or turning around corruption? And I know this is, you know, kind of, you know, hard to maybe get really dialed down, but we really do want to dial down at something. You know, what's the one action that implemented at the local level could curb corruption?
Maybe I can attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think in my view and in my experience, one action that perhaps we can do is to focus on outcomes or demand results rather than outputs. Outputs are easy because sometimes nobody really questions whether nobody really follows up. But if you focus on outcomes, then you are basically, and this is, I think, connected to what Arthur referred to earlier, is the customer receiving the service. If you focus on outcomes, this is really the customer receiving the service and how sustainable it will be. Don't just have a one-off check. It is something I think you need to do over time. If there is non-delivery, then definitely this raises questions on the value of money, which may inevitably turn around, in my view, can turn around corruption once people start focusing on the value of money, simply because there are no outcomes out of that, whatever investment that there is. Yeah.
If I may add to what Robert was saying, that I agree completely. But I would go a step before, and you mentioned it, Barika, and it's in terms of assessing which are the specific risks, also of the specific context we're working in, also in the specific project. So I think one of the key actions that should be done at the beginning of a project is basically to start to build this joint understanding of which are these integrity risks that could happen in each part and in each element of the value chain of a specific project. Which are the risks, how they can materialize, and how you can establish controls to prevent them. And specifically with this, and talking about the local level, we have developed a tool from WIN's side that's called WIRI, and it's basically the Water and Sanitation Risk Index that uses big data to start identifying where are these more pressing red flags in terms of integrity issues in a city level. So I think it depends who are we talking with. But if you're talking, for example, to an investor, that was your example, Barika, before, I think this could be a very accurate tool in terms of identifying where are the risks and start establishing specific measures to prevent this risk from happening before you do your investment, or once you are working at a city level, to see how you're going to close the gaps that, as Robert was saying, and also Ato was saying, this intervention would lead to specific outcomes in terms of service delivery, in terms of access to water and sanitation, in terms of inclusion, in terms of other outcomes that we can develop. Thanks.
If I should add a few more, this time I take it from, in terms of actions, you know, you need to go to battle with your eyes open, you know, and you need to understand the environment where you're going to make the investment or you're going to make the action. So you might want to look at the country diagnostics, integrity diagnostics, governance diagnostics, or look at the utility diagnostics. That specifically, if you're going to invest in an urban space, you want to do a proper utility diagnostics. And so that's important, because you cannot invest in a vacuum. And I think you need to be prepared to know what is happening in the country, what's happened to the institutions before you start investing. Otherwise, good money will follow bad money, and you won't get the results that you need. I make a specific example in Nairobi. Nairobi was a city maybe 20 years ago, about 2 million people plus, but very bad services. The city council was in charge of utility in the services, and there was no service. People pretend to produce the water, and people pretend to consume the water, and nobody was satisfied at the end of the day. Based on the country and the utility diagnosis, we decided to change the complete structure of utility management. And that's where the regulatory services, the assets holding company, and the utility proper was incorporated. And it took some while to do that and get a structure of services that will allow transparency in delivery. It will allow supervision of services. It will allow regulation of the service. So I think that those actions can be done on the macro level to create the environment for services to be provided creditably. Otherwise, you don't know what you're doing. You can pour some money. And that point in time, we felt that if investing in the city council utility was a waste of everybody's time. So we created an institutional framework for service delivery. And that's when the regulatory environment was set up and the service delivery environment was set up before the investment could proceed. The next level, I think, is that when you structure the utility itself, you need to put in, after the utility diagnosis, you need to put in checks and balances, for instance, that will allow for corruption to be minimized. And one thing I remember very well in Nairobi, for instance, if I still use a Nairobi example, is to creating a utility and protecting the utility away from its own shareholders. So the city council, even though the services utility was owned by the city council could not be on the board, the chairman could not be on the board, the deputy chairman could on board. And we had to use the company law, to structure in such a way that you can protect the utility from its own self. The bad behaviors can stop because you have outsiders looking into and create a board and create a professional class. And I remember very well that in Nairobi water supply, virtually the only person who got his job back was the technical service director, who was a competent engineer. Everybody, we brought in the whole management team to start working in the company, create a company structure that will allow for services to be delivered, investment to be delivered. I think that's the second thing. And then in creating the consumer advocacy group, the regulatory agency created the consumer advocacy groups and so on, and you have a routine monitoring of investment and monitoring of services. Because if you don't have that structure, it's very difficult to pinpoint when corruption is happening at the macro level or even at the micro level. But at the service level in particular, I mean, you have to take some actions. In rural water supply, a signboard might be enough. People would know that who is the contractor, who is the consultant, who is how much is the money invested in the city. People have a sense of value. That when they are not getting it, they will complain. So you need some specific actions like that. But in the urban space, a regulatory framework is important. I think Robert can talk more about that than me in terms of what went on and how the institutional structure helped to deliver better service for the city of Nairobi.
Yeah.
Robert, do you want to add any more?
Not exactly. I think Ato has said it all. But then the challenge comes in connected to what I said earlier about systemic corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we a lot of things were changed to have a new institutional framework for the water sector for the whole country. But now we are now I think dealing with the challenges of the people who have actually been put to actually deliver the water services. There have been a lot of improvements, yes, but I think there is so much more to be done. Just to take it from the example of Nairobi. Nairobi, for example, before I left, 2 years before I left, we had very big challenges with respect to management, to the extent that the non-revenue water had risen up to 50%. And that is not acceptable at all.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, it's basically because of kind of a management don't care attitude, in my view. So there's still a lot of work to be done. We are also dealing with the devolution that came in about 10 years ago. And that devolution has also brought in very huge challenges. But one of the successes that we have had, and this is related to a question I've seen Peter has put in the WhatsApp, is how then do you deal with the local authorities? And how we did with the local authorities, and this is a principle that we used even 20 years ago, is to separate ownership from management. You separate ownership from management, and then you subject the utility to regulation. Then now start dealing with the challenges from that point onwards. But make sure that you have the political goodwill, the political support to separate ownership from management, because owners are the politicians and they have their own ways of interfering in many things. Thank you.
So what I get, so you ownership separated from management, structure, transparency, focused on the outcomes and accountability. Yes. Right? So, and then the users really say, like, I'm not getting service. What's happening? Exactly. That voice from the bottom. Okay, yeah. Great.
Farika, if I may add, because I think this point and this summary you have made is very clear, but I would add something that's also the monitoring and basically civil society monitoring. Mm-hmm. So also, if you have all the institutional framework in place, how do you guarantee that when you have new people that are working in these positions, continue complying with the same institutional framework and continue complying with the same transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption principles? And then I think one key action is also to strengthen, so you can work from the top, but you also have to work from the bottom with civil society organizations, training them and generating their capacities so that they can set all these entities and governments accountable and can look at the outcome level and say, okay, you promised you were going to do this. Where is it? Why haven't it been? Why it hasn't been done in this way? If you're allocating budgets, for example, why did you allocate it to this region and not to the other region where you have bigger needs? So I think these are the key questions and the difficult questions that civil society has to do more at the end or more in this monitoring and supervision level. So I would add that as well. I think it's
yeah,
great. Yep, Otto. Oh, hold on.
If I can add, I think Robert mentioned something about outcomes. At the end of the day, it's about service to people. So you should have a deliberate mechanism of tracking whether people are getting services. So the annual reporting or quarterly reporting, any reporting regime, either to the regulator and to the general public, it becomes very important. Because an annual report should be able to be publicized and so on, so that consumer advocacy groups can get into the fray and bring counter information that they have in terms of surveys that they've done in the poor areas or even in the rich areas. to bear. Because if you don't have that consistent monitoring regime, institutionalized monitoring regime, publish information that allows consumers to know whether the city is growing. And sometimes you need to even compare the city with another city, to see that the typical city is getting the service. Why is your city not getting the service? Or why your utility is not producing? Or even, so that the kind of contestability also becomes important with different utilities in the country. I think in Uganda, in Tanzania, and so we used to publish an annual contestability report on the different utilities, where the standard indicators are measured against all the utilities. And there was even a prize for the best utility and some sense of punishment for the worst unit, including removal of the managing director, for instance. You need to create some sense of contest or some sense of competition among the utility providers so that they can up their game. So simple measures, but it should be structurally built into the design of the utility landscape, especially in urban areas, and to be able to compare different services in different parts of the city or in different cities to as benchmarks for what is expected from the utilities in terms of service delivery. Because if people are not getting the services, then everything we're doing, whether it's investment or setting up boards and so on, becomes a useless enterprise.
Those are very valid points. A competition, it's all about accountability.
Right.
Right. And then also wanting, service providers wanting to perform and to provide the best service possible for their constituents. Right. Excellent.
Right. But I think like Robert made a point that there's always an evolution. You set up the system and different things come in, like the devolution came in, you need to adapt. And so you need to consistently change the metrics of accountability in such a way that there's no capture, down the road. And that becomes important. And the goodwill and the utility regulatory framework is always very important. I think one important thing is that when there are no consequences for bad actions, people will continue, the impunity will continue. So you need to find a way of dealing with impunity at every level, whether at the board level or at, people should be fired, managing directors should be fired if they don't produce results. And one of the things that we try to look for in most projects is that virtually every manager is on the contract. And you sign a contract, with the board, and the board signs a contract with the ministry, supervision ministry, or the regulator for specific deliverables. And if the deliverables don't come, there can be consequences. I mean, these are all proxies for the bigger question of corruption, but corruption can be very subtle and can be, so when we get into along the discussion in terms of specific contracts and so on, one can talk about specific actions that need to be taken to be able, but you need to get the framework right. If the framework is not right, you don't have pressure, you don't have accountability, you don't have a way to curb impunity, then, no matter what you do, you're not going to get the results.
Okay. Well, building off of that, one of the questions that we did have was, kind of which area along the wash value chain is the easiest to address corruption or lack of integrity, right? That then allows you to build momentum towards making progress along in the whole chain. And, one of the things that you just said was having contracts, managing directors having contracts. And so that's, that's one area. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Something, kind of where you can like pinpoint to adjust, and then it has either trickle down or trickle up effect.
I think from what, Barika, from what we have talked so far, it is clear that it is at the service delivery level. And I want to say this in terms of by calling it the equitable service delivery, which is the interface between the consumer and the utility. In my sense is that when all consumers have hope and can actually attest to service level improvements, they will be more likely to support other steps that need to be taken along the chain to make services even better. Because it will make sense when you're talking to them about the challenges you have, for example, in procurement with the framework in terms of policies, if they are already receiving services, not necessarily as best as they would want to see, but they can see services and and there are progressive improvements in the service delivery. Then everything else you talk to the consumer makes sense, and the consumers are more than likely to support whatever efforts that may need to be undertaken to actually improve the services further. So for me, services, and this we have said it many times, service delivery at that consumer level is really what is critical to change the whole mindset in terms of even looking at the lack of integrity or trying to deal with whatever integrity failures that may be there.
I would like to add to that. First, I think that, and I had to explain it very deeply, but I think that first is how you can use the regulatory framework as a multiplier effect. So if you start from the regulation, establishing the stick and the carrot. So the stick in terms of how service providers have to comply with a minimum of integrity, with a minimum of transparency, of publishing the information they have to publish information, for example, in terms of service delivery, publish information in terms of budgets, publish information in terms of tariffs that can be done from the regulator side, publish information in terms of how the service works. I think that's key. How they are being accountable, how you generate these participation mechanisms to hear complaints of the users and to take this into account during the decision-making process, and how do you establish anti-corruption frameworks. So I think that's key and can be generated through the regulatory framework. But I think something I wouldn't say is the easiest, I think it's the most difficult, but I think it's key element in the value chain, and it's the first and it's the earliest stages of a project. So when you're taking the decisions, when you are allocating the resources. And I think that generally, and I saw in the chat, there's a lot of momentum and a lot of movement around procurement practices, about contracting, and that's very important because a lot of big money is captured during this procurement instance. But I think it's in the allocation process in which you make the decisions of who is going to access the service. If you're going to build a new project, where it's going to be built, who are you going to benefit? And here, I think we still lack a lot of work in how can we identify these risks and how we can empower different stakeholders, from service providers, from governmental institutions, from civil society, to identify and to track these risks and prevent them from happening. And I think this is one of I think it's the most difficult, but I think for me it's key. If you can guarantee that the decisions are made, as Robert was saying, with an equitable perspective, with a perspective of equity, of sustainability, of inclusiveness, then you can guarantee that through all the value chain of service delivery, you're going to guarantee this access, and you're going to have this focus also in the people that need it the most. Thanks.
In fact, it's good that Daniela, you have elaborated on that point. Right now, one of the biggest challenges we have in our water and sanitation sector is the asset holding companies. The asset holding companies, when devolution came in and the law had to be reviewed to align with devolution, were taken out of the regulatory framework. So that has been a very big problem, because once they were taken out of the regulatory framework, they are not able we are not able to do joint planning. Because of the political nature of the whole work, they are able to do whatever they want to do. They invest, they put infrastructure, whatever infrastructure they want to do, and then basically lump it on the water service utility and demand even payments back for loans. And the regulator has been very, very, very strong on this, that you cannot demand repayment of money which infrastructure, even the utility was not part of. It was not even focusing on the priorities of the utility. You just decided from a top level that this is what you are going to do without even the utility on the table. So that is a major issue, I think, which can actually bring out, can actually be huge potential for corruption in the water sector. And I think this is what now we are trying to correct in our institutional framework in the sector. I hope they will succeed this time round. But at the end of the day, if it is a tariff for the utility, what that removal meant is that the investments were delinked from the tariff, or the tariffs were delinked from the investment. Because we want to repay this money back, they have to come back to the table and actually try to review and amend the laws to make sure that they reflect that the asset holding company is part of the regulatory framework. So far, it has been very, very positive because we have a new government for the last 1 month. And I think the talk from the top is actually towards that direction. So I'm really hopeful that some of these things will very quickly be aligned. Yeah.
Right. If I add my two in terms of on the value chain for infrastructure projects, the wash sector, sometimes if you're dealing with a large investment like a treatment plant or the transmission mains and so on, that's where you can, as Robert was saying, I mean, if the asset holder or the owner of the assets gets a crazy investment upstream and you lump it on the utility, you have a problem. I always prefer utilities to build on their own balance sheet, so they take the decisions, and that's a fundamental regulatory design, is to make sure the utility is actually in charge of the balance sheet, and therefore they can make reasonable investments that they know there are consequences for paying and the tariff can support. So if that imbalance is not there, then you have a problem where somebody is making an investment. If you make the investment, then we have to discount it so they can fit the balance sheet. If you don't do that, then you create problems for the utility. But I think in terms of the value chain, in terms of contracting, whether it's consulting for the design side or monitoring side or bidding and for the works, that's where, like they say in Ghana, you shine your eyes. You should keep your eyes very wide open, because that's where any incidents of corruption presents a clear and present danger for utility practices. Because if you invest in a product that is too expensive for the utility to carry on its balance sheet, you have a problem on service delivery down the equation. So the bidding process is, and I think the institution I worked for many years, we put a lot of emphasis on standard tender documents, standard protocols that we encourage governments and the utilities to adopt processes that involve competitive bidding, that there are some works that the utility can do, but beyond a certain threshold, you need to open it up to competition to be able to bring the cost down. So unit pricing becomes very important as a benchmark for controlling contracting, and you need to be extra vigilant even at the tender stage. If you design, you create a white elephant, it comes to provide challenges for the utility. So designing meaningful investment is important. And then also on the contracting side, you need to check. I mean, we had I cannot maybe name all the but typically we found that if you look carefully, even at some of the bids that are submitted, and you check the font, you can tell whether there's collusion among the companies. So you need to be you need to get a right team in place to manage the bidding process and to be able to get the right outcomes. Because at the end of the day, any investment you make is going to be borne on the balance sheet, and the balance sheet will translate into pricing. It will translate to service quality. So if you don't get those lumpy investment especially right, you have a problem down the road. On the other side, I think from the utility side, mandates are very important. I mean, because the target is to reach as many people as possible. So some mandates can be imposed by the board or by the government, and if the mandates are higher than the utility can carry, you need to provide the resources for it. And mandates help also shape, for instance, Uganda. When we started working on Uganda utility, urban national water, the whole national water utility was 13,000 connections. It was a very bad situation. At that time, you compare with Ghana was 400,000 connections, Nairobi was 200,000 connections, but in a very short time, we could mandate by looking at the supply chain and looking where are the bottlenecks. The bottleneck was not even investment. They had assets which they could not translate into services because the distribution network was weak, and the connection, they had a high price for service connection, which was very useful. So we created a concept of free connection, for instance. You virtually provide connections for free if you are within a certain meters from the network. And that was imposed as a mandate as part of the contract with the government that the national service utility was going to provide 200,000 connections. And within 5 years, they were able to produce 400,000 connections. And you could tell on the quality of services improved tremendously for people because we removed the bottlenecks for allowing, service to reach people. But, this might have nothing to do with corruption, but when you focus on the outcome, it helps also to look at ways in which the service can be delivered more rationally, and therefore you can also use that the contracting process to deliver these services quickly to the population.
Thank you, Otto. That was very insightful. So, even along those lines, when you're talking about, examples. So what are some of the most challenging forms of corruption that you guys have experienced? And then what were the outcomes and how were they alleviated? And were they alleviated, and how you were able to deal with them? You don't have to name specific. You can't name specific.
You trying to provoke me. You're trying to provoke me to name names, but I'll try to be. Like I said, let me say, in Sierra Leone, Freetown, when I was country manager, they came to me and the UK government was providing services to them. They came to me and I said, hey, the services are bad. What can you do? I said, look, and I did the quick computation. I knew that they had water. Mm-hmm. At that time, it was not that, but the population was they had water, but the water was not passing through. So we brought a consultant from a similar utility from Uganda, somebody who has achieved something to come. And within a period of 6 months, he was able to quadruple revenues. Was able to quadruple revenues. A lot of leakages existed in the system, and by providing a framework, and what I think William Muhaiwe is the name of the guy we brought in, who had transformed the utility in Uganda. We've used him for services in Tanzania, also to revamp the utility. He also was involved in consulting in Nairobi in the early days and so on. But without any investment, very minimal investment in orientation of our staff, but it took specific actions, contract between the diagnostic section of virtually giving every worker half of the workers in one room and give everybody a piece of paper, right? What do you think is a problem in this water utility? They did that, and then they gave you another piece of what solution you have. Mm-hmm. Within a 3-hour session, the staff themselves came out with the problem diagnosis and the solutions, and you build up a nice SWOT analysis from that exercise, and they begin to say, for the next 100 days, what are we going to achieve? And before you know it, whistleblowers were rife in the company. And because they linked also some incentive that if you are able to get services to frequency of, whatever service deliveries from 6 hours to 12 hours, you get an incentive. It provides a general incentive in the utility for people to report those who were stealing in the company, and it will provide alignment with the objective of society. And in a very short time, they were able to get revenues. They were able to buy chemicals because what was happening, corruption and especially internal decay in the utility present very grave, that I was kind of looking at cholera impacts along the west coast of Africa. When it starts from East Africa, Mombasa, it will get to South Africa within 2 months or 3 months because of the coastal transfers. The same West Africa, it comes to Guinea, it will get to Ivory Coast or Accra in less than no months. And we found that there was no chemicals. Virtually, they had a good reservoir and they were just pumping the water through because the utility could not generate enough revenues. So having revenue to buy their chemicals, having revenue to pay staff, it was becoming important. So a very simple metrics of improved management techniques can get this utility to a level where they can, but sometimes once they got a bit of money in their pockets, they threw away everything and started going their bad ways. So those kind of, but there are methods in which you can also create a utility spirit that performance becomes an endemic in the organization, and therefore you can also improve your revenues so that you can have the means to be able to provide the service to the general population. So that's specific examples. Every situation requires different treatment, but you need to understand what is the general situation in that place, and you can then appropriate whether you need an investment monitoring, or whether you need management reforms, or that you need regulatory frameworks. I mean, different in urban space, each or combination of them will help you get services to people.
Thank you. Well, you touched on something about, something being endemic, and one of the other questions was, is it really possible to establish a culture of integrity within an organization that's lasting? You kind of established that in Sierra Leone, and then when they got more money in their pockets, then it went awry. So is it possible? And if so, how?
I think it's possible. Robert can talk more about it because he's sat in the seat long enough to see. We come in and go sometimes, so we don't see what 10 years after what happens, But I can tell that once you have a credible accountability framework for the utility, professional account, because you have to produce your balance sheet, you have to produce your annual reports, your performance report, and there are consequences for these reports happening down the road. The regulator is fining people or asking people to be removed for bad management. You create a culture over time. Of course, sometimes you become too friendly and overly familiarity, as they say, breeds contempt. That we are too familiar with it, that we don't apportion the right accountability checks. So things slow down. But I think for me, the government, that's why a willing government is also very important, and to create a sense of mission in the utility or in the regulatory practice, that consistency becomes issue. But what I found is that comparing cities or comparing countries provides additional pressure. Additional pressure from the professional angle of a utility management. If you provide people see that, why are you the one producing the West services in one country or in one city, it provides a benchmark for others to want to perform, and there should be rewards associated with it. I mean, because I remember I used to, in utility, one of the things that I did in some of the projects that I managed was to negotiate salaries of managing directors, to help the government negotiate. Because if you don't, let's say, if you provide peanuts, you feed monkeys or something like that, But you need to set the right parameters for the MD to be able to be accountable, and you need to find a way to incentivize the system, both at the management level and the staff level, to be able to consistently deliver and to be able to benchmark them against other utilities so that they know they're under pressure. The Association of African Utilities, for instance, is doing a wonderful job bringing people together. And there's a kind of, a bit of a, beauty contest in a way, that when you go to the Association of Water Utilities meeting and you don't deliver services to you stand out. You stand out. So next time, maybe you come home, you want to do something better. For next time when you go to these professional meetings, you're able to deliver a better report of what your city, what to supply, or the innovations that you're doing to improve our service. I think at the end of the day, it's quality of service. While you consistently provide a service and quality of leadership in making sure that the institutional framework that you put in place stays.
Perhaps I could add there, Barika, I think it is possible to actually establish a culture of integrity, but let's all appreciate that it's a long-term process because it's basically about catalyzing that culture, and I want to borrow that from the Water Integrity Network. When you look at integrity, it is primarily about who we are as persons, and I don't want to be philosophical here, but sometimes it is important to have that philosophical reflection and ask yourself who you are as a person and how do you manifest that. And you manifest it by striving for the common good. And I think WASH is a common good for the people. And you manifest it by delivering WASH in the best way possible. And that essentially will be in line with our nature as human beings, despite the challenges in our institutions, because many of us hide behind how our institutions are and kind of behave like we were made for the law rather than making the law ourselves. We should also act in a way that there is also a natural law that is based on our nature as human beings and on the nature of the societies we live in. So corruption matters in the water sector, more importantly because it is a moral problem, it's moral deprivation. It deprives people of a basic common good essential for a decent life. It actually kills. So if you kind of approach it from that perspective, I think you are able to change human beings and or the people working in the sector. And it's a long-term process. But perhaps it's also important to kind of who do you start with? And I think this is what this is a point that Ato has referred to a lot. What kind of people do you have there to actually steward the utility towards that common good which you want? And that is where now you also marry that with their professionalism. Because when you talk about a professional, most of the times it is assumed that there is professional integrity. Unfortunately, many of the times, sometimes it's not there because the professionals also may have their own challenges. But in many examples, to a large extent, I think they demonstrate that professional integrity. In fact, it is taken as a given. When I say I'm a professional engineer, it is taken as a given that I'll do what professional engineers do. But is that what we always do? Perhaps not. So you have to really start with the right kind of people. I'm not saying that they cannot be corrupt or have integrity failures along the way, but it is something you really work on. And continuing to publicly report on the performance of utilities has been seen to be a very good tool when it comes to actually catalyzing a better performance in many of the utilities. An example, I remember when we started publishing and comparing utilities in 2008. After 3 years, Nairobi could not ascend maybe even to near number one or something. And they started complaining and saying that, you cannot compare us with these other small guys. We are big guys. So at the regional regulatory level, regulatory association level, we started now another benchmarking exercise where we could actually benchmark and compare performances among the capital cities, Maputo, Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, Kampala, Lusaka, and all that. And from that time, Nairobi stopped complaining that it's being compared with the local small utilities. And they could see now where they rank in terms of the regional utilities, the capital cities. And that may have catalyzed some improvements, but it still went down to having challenges with the individuals who are managing the utility. And I think that was the biggest challenge we have even up to now. Perhaps I could add, with your permission, the previous question that you asked about the biggest form of corruption.
Yeah.
In my situation, I think it is political corruption, in my view. That has been a very difficult form of corruption to deal with because it is done under the cover of the law. And sometimes it may be the case that the law is even changed to facilitate political corruption. And this is closely linked with the corruption in business or business corruption, where the power and the wealth are intertwined. And to get things done, you have to use agents and encounter very high demands of illegal payments to get anything done. The water sector, as we have said in this panel, is highly capital intensive, and therefore inevitably to attract politicians or the so-called tenderpreneurs. That is what we call them. They are fellows who kind of live on actually selling tenders to people and all that, and that really is a very, very difficult form of corruption to address. So, and as we all know, our politics are more, at least in my context, our politics are motivated by the desire to control resources and also nepotism and all that. And this requires that if we have to change this culture, which actually makes corruption thrive, then we have actually to change from the top in terms of in a way that the top addresses or starts addressing more of public interest than private interest. I think, to me, to the extent that after many years of experience, political corruption has actually been a very major problem, and I can't say straightforward how you deal with it. It is context specific, but I think many of the actions we have talked about here in terms of transparency, building accountability, and actually bringing in civil society and people to participate may actually be a good framework to address it and minimize it. Thank you.
Barika, if I may, I would like to go back to the culture of integrity question. So I think this is a key question. It's very challenging to generate this culture or to generate culture changes at organizational level, at societal level, whichever level, but it's key. And I think that one of the lessons that we have had, for example, working with utilities in Latin America, we were working with a specific utility implementing a process of change towards embedding integrity in all their processes. And I think something that is key here is, first, integrity generally in service providers, but in many kind of organizations is embedded, or it's very limited to a specific area. That can be the area of compliance, it can be the area of legal, it can be the area of, it depends on utility, but it's generally one area. And I think one of the key challenges of making this cross-cutting to the whole utility and really generating this culture is that the water and sanitation sector, it's very technical. So the people that work in the technical and the operational areas feel, as Robert was saying, are very professional. Probably they're very good at their job, technically speaking, but I feel that these more soft issues such as integrity, good governance are not as relevant. So I think one of the key issues that we have to take into account is how to make integrity cross-cutting to all the areas. And this can be done, in our opinion, and from the work we have been doing at WIN, from two perspectives. So first, you have to impulse integrity from an institutional level. You need to have an engagement from the top, a commitment from the management that basically establish resources, establishes plans to implement these integrity plans within the utility, but also to make this cross-cutting, as I was saying, and not to make it only from the area of legal or of the area of compliance. But also, when you're generating this plan, you also have to develop a bottom-up process and start hearing people and start empowering them with this process as well. So it cannot be something imposed, but it has to be something that comes from the bottom and basically starts understanding which are the incentives people have to be corrupt. Maybe, and it was briefly mentioned by Atto, are the salaries are very low. There are a lot of studies from this political economy perspective that align salaries with people receiving bribes when they have a connection or when they have this interaction with users, for example. And also following on what Robert was saying, and from a sociological perspective, I think there are three drivers that can make or can change a culture and the behavior of people. The first one is basically legal incentives. So basically, if you do something wrong, there's going to be a sanction. The sanction can be you're going to be fired from the organization. If you steal a lot of money, maybe you're going to even have a legal sanction. So those are the sanctions that from a rational perspective as an individual, you can decide if you want to do something or not. But there are other two perspectives that I know that Robert mentioned them very, very briefly. And the other one is societal incentives. So we also act as societal people. We are not individuals that live alone. And we're always checking what people think of our actions.
Mhm.
So if you start generating a culture in which corrupt practices are not only sanctioned, but are also blamed, and when you start seeing that acting in a corrupt way is not fine, and that the people that act in this way are being left alone, then you also have other incentives of people to act in a more correct way, because you don't want to be seen as the corrupt person and organization. You want to be seen, and even as an organizational level, you don't want to be, as Robert was mentioning, from the Nairobi utility. You don't want to be seen as the small utility, or you don't want to be seen as the corrupt utility. Quite the opposite. You want to be as the one that's transparent, that's giving the good, the good example. And finally, and I think the third incentive, that is very difficult, is from moral perspective, and it's how do we understand what is right and what is wrong. And then from here, and Robert mentioned it very good, it's in terms of they are providing services, but also help achieve the human rights to access to water and sanitation. So the mandate, and that's what the importance of the work of utilities is so important, because they're contributing to the welfare of society and of users. And then I think this is also something that has to be cross-cutting to the whole organization. And just to close, and to give a very specific example, we were working with a utility in Latin America with this management process of integrity. We're working for several years, and I think we did make some changes in terms of generating this culture. And at some point, the management changed because of political reasons. And one person entered with his team, and after a couple of months, they were involved in a very big corruption scandal because they were capturing certain resources and all these things. And then after a couple of years, we came back to the utility and we started analyzing the case. And we saw, even though this happened at the management level, at the medium level, and at the micro level, these practices didn't go down. These corrupt practices didn't go down. And it happened because I think at some point, the culture of the people changed. And even if they understood that the management was not behaving according to certain principles, they continued, pushing for this integrity minimum parameters within the utility. And I think this example is very, very interesting, because even though the results were very bad because it was a huge scandal, we were seeing if this minimum of integrity culture did not exist, then maybe the results would have been worse. Maybe the utility wouldn't even exist right now, because they would, go to will have a lot of issues. So I think this is a key question when you're talking about how to promote integrity in service providers. We have discussed of risk assessment, we have discussed about plans, we have discussed about how to generate incentives from outside, from the institutional level, but from the inside, from the individuals and from the culture, I think it's key. Thank you. And I can talk about the other question, but I would like to hear Robert's and Ato's reactions if there are some.
Right. Just a short, if I can add something quickly. Yeah. I looked at the questions and answers section whilst Daniela was talking, and I could something about staffing, something about local governments and so on. And I think the institutional design of utilities for urban has to be take this into consideration, because increasingly, because of devolution, a lot of local governments are owning the utilities. But as Robert said, and I mentioned also, you need to protect the utility from its owners, and there are standard ways in which company law addresses that, and you can do that. Of course, you can't win it all, in terms of if the political environment is hopeless, but at least you have to try professionally to make sure that you separate ownership from the day-to-day management of the utility. And you need to bring in, I remember in Uganda, for instance, we need to let go 6,000 staff. In Tanzania, we need to let go 2,000 staff. Over time, we got better, about the techniques for doing that. And that's sometimes cutting deals with the Ministry of Finance for debt suppression. So you suspend the debt and use the money available to utility to fire the staff. Because if you don't, in this modern utility, you have to use computerization. You need to digitize the network. You need to bring engineers. You need to bring consumer advocates. I mean, the era of engineers controlling utility is gone and gone forever. That you need people with chemistry, to do the water quality. You need to bring people, and also sufficient at the management level, not engineers. Any utility you go, I'm an engineer myself, you go, it's full of engineers, it's a bankrupt utility, because you don't have the multidimensional staffing needs, finance people, those who know the investment planning. And so you need to bring the complement of management that can deal with the utility practice of today. So if you don't have it, deal with it, right up front, and I think there are ways in which you can deal with that in terms of making some transactional deals with the government to allow the staff to go in a smooth manner, and we managed to get rid of 6,000 people and brought in 200 managers. We didn't need to bring all the 6,000 people back. Right. They needed only 200 people in management and middle level, to improve the professional quality of the utility. And then things can begin to work better. Because if you don't address that, and you allow the staff, poor quality of staffing, you can't even repair a leak, because a leak is a leak in a water supply system is a function of something else. It's not just because you have a leak you go and fix a leak. So you need to have people who have broader understanding of the whole network. So then you can apply these monitoring regimes of staff per 1,000 consumers. You can apply those rational utility benchmarks properly, because if you don't have the right staff, you don't have the right mix of staff, and so you can't do that. So some fundamentals in terms of structuring of the utility for urban water delivery is important. You need to have a PR, a good communication department that responds to not just providing information to people, but responding to consumer demands. So you need to staff it properly, and if you don't do that, it doesn't work. So maybe I'm mixing it up, but the institutional design for urban utility management is important, and it's essential and you need to let it grow over time, and provide the right incentives for better performance. At the end of the day, as I said, is quality of service is what is at stake. Quality of service. I mean, we might be talking about corruption as a topic, but it's important to situate corruption, that corruption destroys quality of service. And then one can begin to understand the quality of service. If you put that as front and center, you'll be able to structure the utility appropriately. You'll be able to get the right types of investment. You need to get the right type of regulatory regime to make sure that consistency in services happen.
Along those lines, what I'm just thinking about is, sometimes, we talk about the end user. The end user is really, from the bottom up is what really can hold, a utility accountable. How do you empower that end user to actually do that? You talked about, a utility having a communications department. When I was living in Uganda, and, if I didn't get a service, then I would call. But, my housemate, she was Ugandan, and she, I would ask her these, and she said, oh, it's just, kind of that it's just how it is, right? But because I would call and then they would respond, she was like, oh, I can actually, I can actually call and demand for service. So how do you empower that end user to actually do that so that they can demand the service that they need and they want and that they're supposed to be given? And then that helps, to curb the corruption.
I can start if that's
Go ahead.
fine. So I think there are different ways, and you have to empower. You have to work with different stakeholders. So first, seeing it from what the utilities can do, for example, to empower the end users, there are several indicators of how utilities can be more transparent. And for example, when you have, so it's a very clear example, when you receive the bill of your water consumption at the end of the month or at the end of the year, depending on how it works in every country, some utilities in some countries can include there some information. And do you have any question? Do you have any complaint? Feel free to ask us on our webpage. Feel free to call us here. Feel free to go to our offices that are here. So I think there the utility plays a key role in terms of being transparent and in terms of trying to be very innovative on how to get the information to the user. Because I know that sometimes we talk with the utilities and they say, yeah, we published that in the web page. And we say, yeah, but how many clicks do you have to, you have to click until you arrive until the place where you can, send a complaint. And no, 10 clicks. So it's really not very possible. Also, you have to consider that not all users are the same. So here we're considering that we're talking of users that, for example, know how to read and how to write, that have access to internet, that have access to a computer. But what happens with users that are in more vulnerable conditions? And probably these are the ones that need to raise their voice more than others that are probably covered. And then I think here it's where utilities have to think in innovative ways, but also you have to use other kind of stakeholders. So for example, there are associations of users that can help raise the voice of these people that maybe sometimes don't really know how to file a complaint, don't really know where to get the information. On the other hand, and I said this at some point, it's also civil society organizations. They need to, I think one of their roles besides being watchdogs is also raising the voice of the users and basically helping them see and get this information. And also of the regulators themselves. And of course, Robert, I guess we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but one of the key functions of a regulator is also to work or to be in the middle, kind of canalizing these possible conflicts that can come up between service providers and users. So how you can use these functions to basically to empower them and give them a. And before I finish, and I would like to deepen a little bit on the importance of generating specific spaces for users that are more in peri-urban and in more vulnerable spaces. So for example, informal settlements that maybe are not users because are people that in many cases are not connected, but still are citizens that should have any space or any kind of water and sanitation provision. Mm-hmm. In there, and we are working with a utility in Argentina, for example. They have developed some community, basically some community groups that are in these informal settlements and that have a direct contact with the utility and with whom they can raise their voices, they can raise their complaints, and with whom the utility is trying to think in innovative perspectives, how to hear them. And as you were saying, Bert, I think it's not only hear them and know where to complain, but it's also to receive an answer. Because if you call and if you send a lot of emails, but you don't receive any answer, you are not doing anything. So utility service providers, but also governments have to be very responsive in terms of these complaints and these questions they are hearing. And going a step forward, I would say there also should be some transparency in terms of, there are some indicators that are also in terms of performance of how many complaints did you receive and how many complaints did you answer and did you really resolve. And I think this is key, and we should try to promote for this higher transparency and also accountability in the sector. Thanks.
I think in most cases, regulators or the regulatory body is supposed to establish ways of dealing with, for example, consumer complaints, but also goes further than that in terms of actually how do you engage consumers, because that way then you are trying to basically empower them. We are a bit lucky in our context because we have public participation as a national principle and in fact a value of governance. So you cannot take major decisions as a utility or even as a regulator without involving the public. That way then it is part of empowering the public, because within that process of involvement, and in fact, the regulator goes ahead and defines what passes as public consultation, what passes as consumer engagement, because before you bring in a tariff, you have to do a public participation. Before you even get a license as a water utility, you have to do public participation. Before you bring out any regulatory tool, you have to do a public participation. So all this is actually geared towards empowering the users, empowering consumers. Many utilities, if I can give an example, have been challenged by users, especially during a tariff public consultation. everybody expects that our tariffs, we appreciate that our tariffs are on the lower side. So if we are going to actually see services improvement, then we need actually to kind of adopt cost-reflective tariffs. But you see, we have been doing tariffs now for the last 10 or 12 years, but unfortunately, services have not improved in the same speed. So the questions now that come up with regard to utilities when they are doing a tariff consultation is, yes, you want us to actually approve or kind of support this tariff increment. But the last time, 3 years ago, the non-revenue water level was 40% or 50% or 60%. Now it is maybe from 60 to 40%. I mean, how can that support? How can we as consumers support your own inefficiency? And a lot of that inefficiency is also brought about by corruption, for example. So it has actually forced many utilities to actually focus on many of those issues that consumers are raising. Unfortunately, some of these issues also require quite a lot of investment support, but not a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it still requires some money. And one can ask, in this non-revenue water issue, the question has been, what comes first? Is it the chicken or the egg? Do you get the money or the water first? But you kind of find yourself that you really need the money to correct the non-revenue water problem, and then you can have services improving. So there are challenges within that, but I think there are efforts that are being done, and a lot of it also has to do with empowering consumers in terms of what they should expect and how they should follow on if it is not coming, and how they should now work together with the utilities about partnerships. But also, in as much as it's about partnerships, a consumer also wants to see that their water problems are being sorted out. I mean, it can't be any other way. If they are not being sorted out, then of course they will have their questions with respect to what kind of proposals you are putting forward and how perhaps you are implementing those proposals and operationalizing many of the principles that should actually be guiding your service delivery. Okay.
If I might add my 2 cents, I think for me, it has to even be with board appointments. The structure of your board should reflect the structure of your services. So if you have a large informal settlement in your service area, then there should be representation of the informal area sitting on your board. So you can control policy and you can control investment, you can control things. Also, we always typically, and I think Guy Norman asked a question about for a large urban utility investment, can you put 1%, for instance, it could be even more, depending on the structure of the services. If services to the poor is really in a bad shape, you need to add money for connections to this service area, transmission to the service area that is not properly serviced, and you need to provide a communication strategy for service for the poor, including something that we did in Uganda and even Tanzania, was to subsidize connections. Because if you don't have the subsidized connections, you cannot get service to the poor, areas especially. So you need to structure all this into your design of your project and also design of the institution. So you make sure that the representation of the underserved on the board, that helps you provide appropriate regulation for how services for the poor is regulated. So I think that's for me very, very fundamental. If you miss it in design, what you do after the fact doesn't really improve services. There's also the hotlines. Every utility where its source has to have the dedicated hotlines for reporting on service quality and also faults and service. And there should be a service charter in every utility in terms of people should know how long it takes for you to respond to a problem. So that if they don't, in 2 days, they don't have the leakage is still is on, they can call a service line. And then there should be a minimum standards in terms of how long it takes for the utility to respond. So you need to build all these into the service charter and the service delivery. Otherwise, it's after, once it becomes an afterthought, it doesn't get properly resolved. One thing I am very, I don't know whether agnostic is a word, or I'm totally against prepaid meters, for instance. You cannot use prepaid meters as a vehicle for consumer management. Because if you get the money already, before people pay for it, prepaid meters was not designed for consumer day-to-day consumer operation. It was designed for a specific segment of the population that did not even have enough resources to pay monthly bills. It wasn't designed as a full-scale utility. Now you see a lot of lazy utilities are using prepaid meters to collect the money from the consumers. Then after the fact, they've taken the money, they don't even respond to their services anymore.
Right.
So I think that the design of investment, the design of utilities have to factor in the question of that, putting the demand side, the consumer at the center of it, making sure there's representation at the board, making sure there's a program for services to vulnerable people, and making sure that there's a dedicated communication strategy and service charter to respond to problems.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you, everyone. So this has been a great discussion. I'm going to move on to the question and answer portion. Now, we've answered most of the questions already through this discussion, but just to touch on what you started to ask or answer Guy's question was, he said donors tend to focus their support on service providers and institutions in a big wash project, the development bank or bilateral. We'd be lucky to see 1% of the total budget spent supporting civil society accountability platforms. Would the panel agree that this is an issue, and are there solutions? So in terms of on the donor side, how do we make sure that more than just 1% are allocated to this?
I can start.
Go ahead,
if that's
Danielle.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
First, I think that we need to generate more advocacy on different scenarios, also on a global level, to start identifying if we want to fight against corruption, and how we have implemented a lot of different recipes, and evidently they have not worked. And we have seen, it's not that this is the only answer, but I think this is a key answer in terms of civil society empowerment. So we need to start showing more evidence. We need to start showing more information to generate more advocacy on the importance of involving civil society organizations, on empowering, because they also, and on strengthening them, because they also have integrity failures within that we need to help them face before this process. And and then continue working hand in hand with them. With that, I think that we have two specific examples that we're developing from WIN with some of our partners globally. The first one that I mentioned briefly, I think in the first intervention, is this Water and Sanitation Integrity Risk Index. So we have developed the index, but when we're going to apply it in a new country, and specifically in a city, there we work with civil society organizations, helping them basically understand the index and basically trespassing the methodology so that they can understand it and they can be empowered by this methodology. And because it's a key question that then donors always ask, and it's the sustainability of the projects. So how long do you have to continue investing in a project until you will have results? And I think that when you start generating them or strengthening the capacities in the ground and guaranteeing that local partners have the capacity basically to take these methodologies and to take them forward, then you are answering partially to this sustainability question. So this specific example goes basically on trespassing this methodology to civil society organizations in the ground, so they can periodically start analyzing and identifying this integrity risk index in the levels of their cities, and how they can use the gaps they have identified to generate a higher accountability, to continue monitoring specific projects, and to continue basically positioning this in the agenda of their cities and their government. On the other hand, and another very specific example we are developing, we are working with COST, that's the Transparency in Infrastructure Projects Initiative. And with them, we are basically developing a tool to identify red flags and integrity risks in infrastructure projects in the water and sanitation sector. And the idea is basically to develop a series of questions or indicators that governments should publish on infrastructure projects that include number of beneficiaries, that include indicators around procurement, that include indicators of how the decisions are being made, if needs assessment were done, among other very specific needs. And here, and how civil society organization works, is that in a second step, we work with civil society organizations, helping them in the same modus as before, helping them understand the methodology and helping them monitor these indicators that the governments should publish. So it's not only working in terms of transparency with the governments and service providers so that they publish the information, but also working with civil society organizations so that they understand it and they know how to monitor and how to track it and generate advocacy in the government. So I think these are two very specific examples of how civil society organizations can be involved specifically in tracking these projects and also answering to the donor-driven question. We have the general advocacy, but we also have to understand how we can make these processes sustainable in the ground, also working with local.
Thank you, Danielle. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Let me say that the two questions from Paul and from Guy, I think I want to emphasize that you need to plan for it. You need to, and especially in this day of technology, digital space that we have, and availability of cell phones and so on for most consumers and so on. The dashboard system works. You need to have people access to information about the service in their area.
Hold on 1 second, Otto. I just want to read Paul's question since you're going to respond to it. So he says, through public information sharing events, translated publications, toll-free feedback platforms, and other telephony services, end users will be armed with knowledge on utility services and be able to hold utility and policyholders, government to account. To assist in sector corruption, prevention, and control, the public can be given access to a whistleblower number where to report known corruption or service delivery inadequacies. While CSOs can assist in this arena, sufficient law enforcement agencies are there to prosecute corruption because it still remains crime in our statutes.
Right. Basically, that's what I was reflecting, that we are in a good space now with availability of smart technology, smart platforms, but it should be a deliberate design in the communication system in the utility that they provide information to people, and people have access to information through their dashboards. The annual reports are fine, and annual benchmarking reports are fine, but ongoing continuous information that you need to be able to check your water bill anytime. You need to be able to check your payments anytime. You need to be able to, there's a hotline to report, and you should have an expectation that when you report the 3 days or 1 day, whatever service that you need, you are reported on. And if you're not, escalation methodology, or if an NGO is available to act as an escalation vehicle, we need to design that in the system. And I say sometimes you need to deliberately design service for the poor from the beginning. You don't have to wait to the end of the tunnel. All the investments are done, then somebody has to wait for 10 years to get service. No, right from day one, use some of the resources to provide services to the poor areas where there's no service, even if it's a yard tap. Controlled by a token or whatever system that you can provide something for people to hold on to, because if they don't have an appreciation of service, they cannot even report or they cannot be engaged. So they need to have a taste of the water supply. They have to have a taste of the services to be able to respond. And I can tell you, once they get used to good, consistent water delivery, they don't want to go back. And they will harass the utility. They'll provide a lot of, utility to keep and it also helps as energy for the utility to improve its services if the consumers are coming after them all the time. And there should be consequences. If somebody is not working, as they said, you lead, you follow, or you get out of my way.
Excellent.
I also think that there are, when you look at the big donor or development partner projects, when you look at those big projects and how they are funded, there's a lot, there's very many institutional issues that are critical for the sustainability of these investments that are actually sidelined. They are actually not considered in the funding. And this is becoming an issue because it's not just about civil society monitoring. That is part of it. But there are also other issues to deal with the root causes of why they had to come back to build. They are even coming back maybe to rebuild. Maybe before that, there was even the infrastructure, which actually was neglected and went into disrepair. And now you have to kind of rebuild anew. There has to be the root causes of this kind of situation. And I think when you are now coming in to do even further funding for this, these are the issues we should be able to identify and try to see in the program design, how do we support action on these issues? And there are many. And because not many of them are being considered, you still continue to have these problems of infrastructure that is not delivering, or infrastructure that does not consider a very big portion of the population as part of the service area. One of the requirements I think we have in our water sector is to actually force the utilities or require the utilities to map out these areas where people kind of do not appear in the planning system. And most of these informal settlements don't appear in the plans of even many of these local authorities. So we kind of have required that they be mapped out. There may be challenges or issues with regard to lot tenure and all that, but they still demand or they still require services. And I can tell you, if these people, when these people are put in the service delivery, as part of the service delivery plan, they actually support many of the activities which the utilities may be doing, and that includes service improvement and also even non-revenue water reduction. Because this non-revenue water is technical, yes, but a lot of it actually has to do with the utility losing a lot of revenue. So once you include this kind of people, and this is an integrity issue, once you include them and actually try to prioritize even and target whatever investments you have, so that you do not also just look at the first mile investments, the so-called first mile, where you have huge infrastructure, very attractive. We also look at the last mile, that huge infrastructure, who is it delivering to? You don't leave it hanging, that you have built a dam and 10 years down the line, that water is still in the dam and it has not actually served anybody, because nobody considered that the dam, in fact, was actually meant to serve or augment water supply for a certain area within that service area, or even for the whole service area. So I think that both Guy and Paul have points, and I think this is something that is increasingly being considered even in program design and in investment. But I also want to tell Paul that many of our institutions, perhaps all of them, are required to have even a whistleblowing policy. How good that works, it is institution by institution, but that is a requirement as part of service delivery requirements within any sector, not just in the water sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, I believe that's all the questions that we have for now. But any last thoughts from any of you before I wrap up?
I do have some last thoughts, Parika, if that's okay.
And then I also want you to share maybe the link to the study.
I will. So yeah, so the first, actually that was my first thought. We're going to share this. In 2021, we developed from WIN, from the Water Integrity Network, we developed an outlook and a very deep study trying to understand how integrity and integrity failures materialize in the water and sanitation sector, specifically in urban scenarios. So we're going to share with you the link. I think most of or several of the topics that we touched upon today are included there and are analyzed from different perspectives. And just to close, well, thank you. I think it has been a very, very interesting session. It was quite a pleasure to hear from Robert and from Atto, from your experience, how to deal with these issues. And to close, I would like to add something a little bit out of the box, to say it somehow. We have focused on many of the general issues in terms of corruption and integrity failures that may happen in the water and sanitation sector in the provision of services. But some of the priorities for action that we have identified specifically in this study also include the importance of focusing on sanitation. I think there are so many tools and so many, not so many, but several tools, several approaches that have been developed for the water sector, but I think sometimes the sanitation sector is left a little bit behind. And I think we do need to start focusing a little bit more. How do we identify the integrity risks that are happening in sanitation? I know there are several projects ongoing now, driven by donors, but also by different organizations and governments in the ground around CWIS, for example, of this citywide inclusive sanitation as a different perspective of decentralizing these issues and putting other topics, including integrity, in the agenda. But I would just like to mention it. The other topic that I think it's a huge integrity failure and sometimes a little bit left behind, I have mentioned it during the interventions, but it's basically how we can put a focus on the people that are not being, that do not have any access to water and sanitation, specifically in peri-urban areas, since we're talking about urban scenarios and informal settlements. This is a huge, topic, and sometimes it's also being left out of the agenda because of all the challenges it presents. But it's a key integrity issue that we still have so many people living in the cities that do not have any access to any basic water and sanitation, and are also victims of other kind of integrity failure practices. So I think this is also another thing we have to include in the agenda. We have to put a big focus on it. And finally, one of the materializations or one of these specific practices of corruption we have identified in the access to water and sanitation, specifically in the most vulnerable scenarios, it's a practice that is known as sextortion. And basically, it is the payment of bribes to access to water services through the payment of sexual favors. And this is something that we have identified. We're developing different studies. There's a very interesting study actually in Nairobi, in which they identified that around 80% of the respondents were aware of some sextortion practices taking place in the access to water services in slums or in informal settlement areas. Also, according to another study done by Transparency International, 1 out of 5 women in Latin America have experienced extortion in the access to a public service. So I think that here we also have to put a specific focus on what we were saying at the beginning, how corruption takes different phases and how sometimes it may affect in different ways different populations. It may affect different ways people in more vulnerable conditions, but it may affect also women differently than it does. So I think this is closing with this kind of a down note. I think we have been discussing of different approaches of how to face these issues, but this is also an invitation to start looking at these other areas that maybe sometimes are a little bit left behind and that still have a lot of challenges in terms of integrity in the service program.
Thank you, Daniela, for bringing that to light. I really appreciate that. And that is, yes, there are very many forms that corruption can take form in, and that is an important one to really be aware of as well and to deal with. Thank you. And can you put the link in the chat? You just have to change it to everyone. Okay, any last thoughts from Robert?
No, sorry.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay, sorry. Not really, but I still wanted to emphasize that we have a very common form of corruption, which kind of the awareness about it may be there, but I think it's not stressed enough because it affects even fellow professionals. It doesn't matter whether you're in the water sector or whatever, and this is impunity. people do not do what is demanded of them because nothing will happen. And even if it is about looking at the legal requirements of whatever you are supposed to do, your legal mandate, you simply don't do, because whether you do it or not, nothing will happen. So we simply dance to some tunes, rightly or wrongly, assuming that that is what perhaps somebody up there wants us to do. So I think this is something we can deal with by essentially continuing having a consistent culture of performance reporting, so that you expose these lapses in accountability from the actors in the water sector, at whatever level they may be. I just felt that I think this is something we should mention, because I consider it myself as a form of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Otto?
Right. It's difficult to. I think it's important that corruption, whether at the macro level in the country, or at the utility level, or at the board level, with the contracts manipulation and over building infrastructure that does not serve people, or utility day-to-day practice that penalizes people with bad services and so on. I think we know enough about the subject, and we know enough also about institutional designs that we can help integrate some of these lessons that we had over time into the structure of the boards, the circulation of the company from its owners, and making sure that the companies have the professional stock of people to be able to run professionally. And introducing design that limits corruption. What are the operational? Because if you don't have good people to look at the contracts, you're going to have problems there. If you don't have good people in your operations in the network and so on, if you don't have systems that provide services to people directly, if you don't have reporting systems, as Robert said, and so on. So we have enough. The whole thing is to build it structurally into our designs of the investments or the utility design, so that the utilities are healthy and they have the confidence to be able to serve the population that they are designed to. And then that, as Robert said, if they don't, there should be consequences. So there should not be left to the situation where they pretend to supply and people pretend to consume the water. So at the end of the day, nobody gets services. But it should be. We have enough lessons over the last 30 years to have reasonable designs. So like I said, you don't design a project, large investment in an urban space without targeting services for the poor, right from get-go. You don't design a system that doesn't involve reporting of indicators and making sure that you don't design projects that allow, there are no money for connections, because connections is what will get the service to people. So you need to be deliberate in the lessons, taking the lessons that we know into the space to minimize the big areas of corruption that we've identified, but to create healthy utilities, healthy utilities that can deliver services on an ongoing basis, and populations that, if they don't get the service, they can rise up and demand the services appropriately. So I think we have enough to move forward, and I think the determination or the will to apply these lessons is the challenge going into the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and that is really the key, the will to apply the lessons and to actually set up the structure effectively so that it actually happens. That's what's necessary. So I want to thank you so much, our panelists and the participants, for joining us today. This was a very interesting and valuable discussion. I hope it was valuable for you all. We're always looking for new topics and diverse panelists, which are central to our own values and critical for developing solutions to the challenges facing the WASH sector. So we would appreciate it if you would please fill out the event survey that will pop up once the webinar closes to provide valuable feedback. And if you enjoyed our online lecture and panel discussion and would like to help us out, help us put on more, please consider making a donation on our website at rockblue.org. Thank you so much and have an excellent day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.